Welcome back to the class, everyone. Continuing on here with our fun times in 3v3. We've looked at now Omicrons, how they're going to stand in 3v3, as well as how to use the legend characters in 3v3, which are both fairly new material. What I want to take a look at now are some of the teams that, while they're still older and while we've used them for a very long time in 3v3, that I think are still going to have a lot of viability in this upcoming 3v3, even though they're already, several years old. That being said, I'm not going to include Galactic Legends in here at all, just because most people don't have all 6, so I think it's more beneficial for everyone if we just keep them out for the most part. And also here, we're going to be starting off just by looking at defensive teams. I think it's fair to split both of them. And also, you'll see that we're not going to talk about every single team. We're just trying to focus on some of the older teams that will be good for defense. There's obviously newer teams that are coming in, but right now I think these ones are still going to hold their own. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into 10 of them. First up, we have our Geos. I think Geos are still going to be very, very viable on defense. Every one of these teams, by the way, is going to have a counter, but one of the big things about GC comes down to draining counters. So if your opponent has to use, their Emperor Palpatine or their Vader or something like that to beat your Geos, sure, they're going to beat it, but then that's one team they don't have as a resource versus the rest. So Geos are really still viable, mostly because of the Brute. Geonosian Brute Alpha, he was very, very overpowered in 3v3s because he would always get to some of the Brute, and that would actually give his team 4 characters versus 3. Even some places in the lower regions or the lower divisions, people were using him to solo entire teams, because he was essentially his own team. Spy I really like as the second here, just for your damage output, otherwise you might run the risk of timing out. And then Soldier seems to yield the best results because he adds the most to the team, more so than Poggle or Sunfac. He generates more turn meter, whereas Sunfac really just does everything the Brute does anyways. The Brute can remove either buffs through actually 2 different mechanics, and as well as taunts. So I like these 3 a lot. It's probably going to still see the light of day on my defense. Next up is the man, the myth, the legend itself, GL Newt. While this team has been solved for the most part, it's been beaten. We know how a cheap counter to throw at it to get it down. It's still going to be a pain in the butt. You're still going to have to use something good against it, whether it be your bounty hunters or something else. Newt is really the core here. I like these other 2 just because they're not wildly used in a lot of other teams. Magna Guard, great tank. He'll let Newt start to spread the extortion before they can just ram him down, especially with him not being an R7 for Lord Vader, as well as Jango being here just for the raw damage. It really gives you everything you need. You have a good lead, you have a good support, you have a good tank, and you have a good damage dealer. And it's just going, again, it's going to call out a harder counter for someone to get through. Next up is Gas. Gas is still really, really, really solid for 3v3. Darth Revan for the longest time kind of had his number, kind of had him beat in 3v3, but ever since the quote-unquote nerf for General Skywalker, he's always going to stand up with 100% protection, whether the clones are alive or not. And that makes him a much bigger threat. And the things that I really don't like about this team on offense is that you're never really going to get good banners, and I never feel like I get a good trade. Like, I'll use it against Darth Revan, and it'll just be Gas standing at the end and be like, okay, so I beat a quote-unquote weaker team, and at the same time, I dropped, like, 7 or 8 banners. Like, I don't want to do that. So he gets thrown on defense, and I'll let someone risk a Bam Han Chewie against him, which sometimes works, but just sometimes just doesn't. So that's another team that I think is going to make a pretty strong comeback, and I don't like it as much on offense. Speaking of Rebels, we also have our Commander Luke Skywalker, 3PO, and 3PO Chewie comp here. This was one of the most classic comps that we had, and it's going on defense still for similar reasons as we've mentioned with Gas. It doesn't really seem to have one awesome team that it's going to consistently beat, but at the same time, it's going to call out some really hard counters to be able to take it down. Bad Batch is on the rise to kind of beat it, but at the same time, if you don't have your speeds right, it won't be enough because they have pretty significant recovery. Because one of the issues with Rebels in 5v5 is they don't have a lot of cleanses, but both 3PO and Commander Luke Skywalker have self-cleanses, which essentially means the entire team can be cleansed. So it's very, very good. Again, very good for defense, very hard to track, especially because Chupio's, his chat staring that he has, it is not blocked off by the number of characters. So it's still 40% to himself, and it'll be 20% to the other 2. Now, Mon Mothma. So Mon Mothma is going to be one of the characters that is still going to come out of this a little bit weaker. She's one of the teams that, and General Grievous will be even more, so there's one of the teams that really wants all 5 of the characters. But when stripped down, I believe these 2 are the most crucial. Pow can't really use him as much because he gains so much bonuses for everyone using their basic, and you're cutting 2 characters out of that, and he's not able to do it really to himself, so it's just these 2. It's just not enough to really get him going. Whereas Hawthorne Scout should be generating turn meter no matter what. That's not really dependent on how many people use their basic. Car is there to reduce the turn meter and really to tank so that they can't get to Hawthorne Scout, and then obviously need Mon Mothma. So while it does drop a little bit in viability for this, it's going to continue to be pretty good. And unfortunately, Kyle Katarn just doesn't. We talked about this in our Legends video. He just really doesn't cut it to stick with the Rebel fighters anymore. 10% turn meter off the beginning is just not enough. It's, in my opinion, it's really these 2, and it's going to continue to be an okay defensive team that's going to call something bigger out. Next one is General Grievous, and this one's really weird for us because Grievous, again, very, very powerful in 5v5 and very powerful as an offensive mechanism. If there were ever a 4v4 version that would come to the game, General Grievous would be the absolute best because General Grievous there, to have the lead and do a lot of damage, B1 to heal, B2 to generate turn meter, and then Magnet tank is really what you need to get this team to do everything it needs to do. In 3v3, with having to always strip Magna or B2 or B1, it just does not hold up like it used to. That being said, it's still going to strip a lot of banners. It's still going to do quite a bit in 3v3. The teams that are going against it don't have as many tools, but at the same time, they don't really need them. Again, Grievous is missing that crucial piece. But that being said, he's also missing that crucial piece on offense. And I would rather someone get away with something cheap on defense than take him on offense against, say, CLS and fail. Whereas in 5v5, it would work great. Next is probably the most classic 3v3 team I can think of that's still going to be pretty valid is the Fin Po team. Still very, very good in the olden days, back in the golden days. This team used to consistently call out Han and Chewbacca, which at the same time, they were getting 54 banners on the win, but Han and Chewbacca are arguably the best duo in the entire game, outside of any GL combo. Just absolutely amazing. If you can call them out to get rid of this team, that's awesome. That is really, really cool. And there's some other teams that you can even continue to build with resistance, even with these 2 over here. JTR can still make a great team. Ray can still make a great team. These 2 are not necessarily needed for those 2 other teams. They can kind of do their own thing. Next off are bounty hunters. So I still really, really like this combo of Bosk, Boba, and Dengar. Mando and Greef, they do a lot of really cool things, but I think they're going to be more useful on offense with how they have to be used. They're a little bit more exact about who they target, how they mitigate their damage because they have an Annihilate. Whereas these 3 are just a pain in the butt no matter what. Especially with Dengar and Boba constantly healing the team, and they get to contract for what feels like really fast. Especially if you're not able to have a tank in there, or even if you do, Boba ignoring it and then them hitting it with the AoEs, they get contract really fast, and then they just don't stop. Especially with the amount of speed mechanics there are on this team. So Bot's contract will get them 50 speed alone for the lead contract, but if you look in both Boba's and Dengar's kits for their payout, Boba gets an additional 50 speed on top of the 50 speed we're getting from hitting contract here, and Dengar himself also gets an additional 25 speed until the end of the battle. So the team just starts to run miles around you on defense. And people kind of look at these characters as a little bit more outdated, because they kind of are. But at the same time, that mechanic just makes them such a pain in the butt. Next team is going to be the good old classic Darth Revan. This team, you can still use it this way. If you don't have the Legends characters yet, I think the Legends characters do change this up a little bit. But if you don't have them, it's still very valid. It's still very, very good. I think it's one of the best, most staple teams for 3v3. Again, just like all of them, it's beatable. Jedi Lucas had a lot of success against it. Maul has had a lot of success against it. But at the end of the day, if you can take away that or one more puzzle piece from your opponent, we can call that a win. Next is going to be... This one is actually, we're going to call it old because it appeared in the very last week of 3v3, or the last 2 weeks, but it's still very good and not a lot of people know about it. And it's Maul in the lead, really fast Droideka, and Canderous Ordo. This team essentially has all the main factors that it has in 5v5, where Maul is going to start with Frenzy. Our Droideka is going to be at, 393 speed, or 383 speed, rather, because of his unique and the mods we have on him. So he's going to go first. He's going to roll. Maul is then going to AoE, getting his full 5 stacks. That still, even in 3v3, that gives Canderous enough turn meter so that he's going to go use his AoE, and then all of a sudden, your opponent has to deal with 5 stacks of Anguish, where Maul is just going to delete a character, and then before you even move, it's no longer 3v3, it's 2v3. So very, very good, a very, very good team there between the two of them. So those are the 10 teams I think that we can still rely on for defense. Again, there are new ones coming into the fold, as well as other offense teams, and a lot of that is ultimately just going to depend on roster. But tell me what teams that you're excited to see are coming back. Remember to like and subscribe to the channel, and as always, stay awesome.